Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Julie Marchbanks from Public Strategies, and I will be the host for today. Before we get started, I wanted to review a couple of housekeeping items with you and explain how you can participate in today's Zoom session. We invite you to use the chat box to ask a question, make a comment, or to address any technical issues. Please be sure to select the drop-down Everyone so that the moderator can read your question out loud. If you do not see the chat box located in the panels on your screen, please select the chat icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. The controls will auto-hide, so you may have to mouse over the bottom of your screen to display your meeting control toolbar. The polling feature will be used during the Topical training. You will be prompted to answer the poll. If you do not see the poll, you will need to enable pop-ups in your application settings or change your Zoom video layout. Video layout options are located in the top right corner of your screen. This presentation will be recorded. Recordings, presentation, and handouts will be available on the Exchange about 1 week after the Topical training has concluded. At this time, I would like to welcome our moderator, Tracy Pike, Executive Director with Ascend.
Julie, man, that voice you have and that explanation, I felt like I was on flight 459 or something. You did such an amazing job. Thank you for that, and welcome everyone. We're so excited you came back today, and I'm seeing such positive comments in the chat box. I want to remind you that at the end of today's session, not this session, but at the end of today, you will have an opportunity to give us feedback. And we covet that feedback because only about 20-some people filled out the feedback yesterday. We had hundreds participating. So we covet that feedback so that we know what is resonating with you and how to develop this better for the future. So please, I know everybody's kind of had a day and so they're ready to log off, but if you could just give us a little bit of information. It is now a privilege to introduce to you Melissa Walther from Ascend. She is the National Project Director for the national nonprofit organization Ascend, and also comes to us wielding about 14 years worth of experience in the SRAE field. So you can read more about Melissa in her bio, and I will hand it over to Melissa and monitor the chat box because I think there would be plenty of opportunity for you to participate today through the chat box.
Oh, yes, there will. Yeah, we'll be looking for lots of feedback from you guys. Thank you so much for being here and for logging in to join me for this session on going beyond what is taught to understanding how effective facilitators teach. I know some of you have to be here as a requirement of your grant to fulfill grant requirements, but I'm hoping that all of you are here because you want to be and you want to learn some new stuff to take back with you in your work with youth. Plus, how cool is this that we many of us, you might be at home, or if you're in the office, maybe there aren't quite as few people as usual. You might be able to be joining us in your sweatpants or barefoot or whatever. And I think that's pretty neat that we can even be with our loved ones. I saw somebody sitting outside playing with their kids yesterday while they were joining a session. And so I'm really grateful for these silver linings that this crazy pandemic time has allowed, that we can be comfortable and casual and be with our loved ones, but still have opportunity to really hone our skills and get better at what we do. So I want you to know the beginning of this session is going to be mostly lecture, which I know isn't ideal, but you're all astute leaders, and I think you'll see the value in it. And then the second portion of this session is really going to be opportunity to share ideas and make plans for implementing the information into your day-to-day. So I just want you to kind of know what to expect and be able to be prepared to get your thinking caps on and be willing to share ideas with each other later on in just a little bit. So let's go. Let's get going on this. The objectives for today are listed here. And so we're going to be talking about self-regulation and co-regulation and why it matters. And so you should have a handout for this session. If you want to have it out and ready, we'll refer to it quite a bit. And you could have maybe already downloaded that because it was an attachment in the email that you received with the Zoom links and the agenda for the session today. If you didn't download it already from that, you can access it. Yes, Julia's on it. You should be able to access it right there in the chat feature. You can click on that link and download the attachment there. And I think you'll find those really useful to refer to. Okay, so our objectives are to explain self-regulation and co-regulation and why they matter, describe the supportive process of co-regulation in fostering the ability to manage thoughts, feelings, and actions to achieve goals, and then to identify skills-based coaching opportunities to increase comprehensive learning. I'm very excited to kick off this second day of our Master Facilitator learning track. And throughout this learning session, I'm hoping to offer you tools and best practices to really energize your craft as a facilitator and expand your professional toolkit. And that you can take what you've learned and share it with your colleagues, and hopefully it will inspire you to support their development too. So I loved this quote to kind of start things off. The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, and the superior teacher demonstrates, and a great teacher inspires. And so I'm really hoping to be a great teacher today and inspire you in the things that you'll get to take back with you. So really, the majority of training that program facilitators receive is on curriculum content, or the what of what they're going to be teaching. But facilitation skills and engagement strategies really extend way beyond the content. And the sessions you heard yesterday really highlighted that. And many facilitators might feel comfortable simply knowing what content to deliver. So moving into those deeper waters and grasping how to effectively convey concepts is a bit of a leap for them. But I know that this virtual room full of people, that this room is filled with people who really understand and get that the how content is, not the what, that how content is delivered is really just as important, and some might argue even more important than what is delivered. But those skills that make up effective facilitation, the skills that make the how, are really sometimes presumed to come naturally or not. And so it's presumed to be sort of this innate natural thing that you either have it or you don't. You have that it factor or you don't. And so there's not a ton of training that's typically or consistently provided to develop those skills. And that's really why we're here today. That's why this session exists. It's really about expanding the focus of program delivery from content into some important qualities for masterful delivery. And so let's be clear. Mastering the art of facilitation is a lifelong learning process, as I'm sure you all know. And it's one that really hinges on self-awareness and introspection. And it requires things that we absolutely expect, like public speaking ability and practice. Practice is key. And then it also really includes things that we often forget, like listening and vulnerability. And so we want to see what we can do to really master that part. So keeping in mind that the majority of SRA education is done in a classroom setting, we'll see that reflecting and modeling self-regulation is an important attribute needed for the educator, but it's also an important part of the self-regulated learning strategy for youth. And so this is an important topic for SRA educators because not only is self-regulation needed for effective facilitation, but it's really one of the crucial components that youth need to develop healthy decision-making and thriving. And if you recall, self-regulation is actually a requirement of SRA funding, grant funding. So let's talk about what it is. What is self-regulation? So would anyone like to share some words that come to mind when you hear the term self-regulation? What kind of other descriptive words do you think of when you hear self-regulation? Good, okay. We'll give you just a minute to kind of respond. I see self-control, mindfulness, reflection, awareness, coping, discipline. Now there's too many to even read. Intentionality, self-soothing, great. All right, well, obviously we're in a really great group of facilitators that really get it. And so it's easy to see how self-regulation on a personal level is really beneficial. It can be helpful to think of self-regulation skills as being grouped into these three buckets. There's cognitive regulation skills or managing our thoughts. There's emotional regulation skills, which is talking about managing feelings, and then behavioral regulation skills. And so consider the advantages of being able to manage your thoughts, being able to control fear and anxiety, self-perception, you know, what others are thinking of you. Tracy even mentioned that, if you'll remember from the session yesterday, where she was talking about the importance of being more concerned about what others are hearing you say than what they see or what you look like saying it, right? So that's really a self-regulation strategy, is shifting your focus away from what you look like and being more concerned about what others are hearing. And then the advantages of managing our emotions, so we don't overreact and so we don't exaggerate, and that we don't take offense without cause. That's another kind of strategy that Tracy had mentioned in her presentation, that, you know, it's really important to be really difficult to offend when you're working with youth. So that's part of self-regulation strategy for emotions, emotional self-regulation. And then lastly, obviously, there's lots of benefits to being able to self-regulate our behavior and managing our anger or negative aggression and our body language, because we know that everything speaks, and especially when you're in front of a group of youth and adolescents, they can read through you. Your body language is pretty important in those settings, as you all know. So again, you have your handout, and on it, you'll notice that there are skills listed under each of those buckets. Let me see if I can hold it up for you to see down here, where it talks about different strategies. So under the emotional self-regulation, you see things like self-calming strategies and mindfulness, what some of you had mentioned in the chat there, identifying and labeling feelings and emotions. And then cognitive skills include things like choosing what to focus on, goal setting, planning. I saw some of you mentioned sequential thinking, you know, all of those kind of things are more the cognitive self-regulation. And then lastly, under the behavioral self-regulation skills, you'll see things like conflict resolution and pro-social communication, and then persistence in the face of intense or difficult emotions, which we know these adolescents experience at this stage of their development. And those skills really enable us to be able to handle stress in our jobs and relationships, and resist immediate gratification. They help us to avoid quick decisions that we might later regret, a pretty important life skill, right? And then they help us to manage short and long-term plans, solve problems, and ultimately be more effective partners, parents, and facilitators. So these skills are really critical in helping us be the person that we really strive to be. And so these skills can help us get there, help us achieve those goals. And really, self-regulation develops over time. So just like learning to read requires basic foundational skills that serve as kind of building blocks for more complex skills. So things like being able to recognize letters, that's a basic skill that leads to more complex skills like stringing those letters together to form words and recognize words. And then being able to string those words together into sentences. And so in the same way, self-regulation develops by building one skill on top of the next. And again, it's sort of it's a lifelong process. So at birth, it might look like the ability to be soothed when upset. And then as a preschooler, that develops to, it could mean things like being able to identify feelings and calm down and aid in just basic decision making. And then through elementary school, it could be things like being able to learn how to share with others. And then that continues to grow. So as a teen, it might look like being able to manage emotions, to make the healthiest and best choice or decision, even in the face of strong peer pressure or strong emotion. And through young adulthood and into adulthood, it becomes the ability to empathize with your partner or others, just being able to kind of see their point of view and respond in a way that's best for your relationship and not just for yourself. And early childhood and adolescence are especially important times for self-regulation development because of the changes in the brain structure and function and connectivity that are all happening during that really critical stages of development. And so we'll talk more about, the opportunities that we have there because of that. And although adolescence is a really important time for developing self-regulation, we can continue to grow and develop those skills with support and practice for as long as we live. And this ability to grow capacity for self-regulation is important as we work with parents and caregivers and schools to implement self-regulated learning in SRA to guide those students to optimal health choices. And so if you have parent engagement strategies already, you can maybe look at those and see if there are ways that you can incorporate some support for those caregivers and parents to be able to model self-regulation to their students. So here's the social ecological model, which I'm sure we are all very familiar with. And just as this model demonstrates the many factors that impact individual and their healthy development, and it includes intrapersonal factors such as temperament and genetics and brain development. It also is impacted by things outside of the individual, especially the relationships at the family and community and then society as a whole. So you can kind of think of self-regulation being developed in the context of all these other factors, myriad of factors that are impacting either successful development or a lack thereof. So it's just really critical, especially in the early years, to be aware of those factors that are kind of impacting the student's development of self-regulation. And so in the SRA classroom, we need to be aware of how trauma and stress and lack of support can be contributing to a student's lack of self-regulation. So, we know that stress is registered in the body as a danger reaction, that fight or flight, right? It's involuntary. And it causes physiological responses in the body. It causes an increased heart rate, your muscles tense, your pupils dilate, all these other things, right? And when we experience or interpret situations to be stressful frequently, our bodies don't have enough time to recover. Those systems don't kind of have a chance to reset. And so chronic stress makes it really difficult for our bodies to cope. And so just think of, if that's the experience of the youth that you're serving, but then you expect them to use self-regulation skills in the classroom while you're discussing the sensitive topic of sex and relationships, I mean, you can see why it's really important that we help them develop those self-regulation strategies. And so let's look really quickly at the effect on the nerve cells when these key developmental assets are missing. Really, our experiences shape our self-regulation abilities and skills. So if we are in supportive relationships and environments, we're more likely to develop strong self-regulation. But on the flip side, trauma and stress and the absence of support can really slow or inhibit the processes that promote self-regulation in the brain, which is why we see behavior issues, not thinking of the long term, and unhelpful thought patterns, impulsive reactions from folks, especially if they've experienced violence or neglect or acute chronic stress and other forms of trauma. So if you look here on the left, this is a picture of a healthy nerve cell. And you can see inside this circle that there's a colorful web of neurons that connect different parts of the brain. And in this magnified little portion, it shows all these different branches from that neuron or from that nerve. And then you can contrast that to this affected nerve cell, and you see that there's a lot less of those spidery webs. And then in this magnified version, you can see much fewer branches. And so I am no neurologist or brain scientist or expert, but you even just seeing these visuals, you can comprehend that really, when the brain has been affected by a lack of support in the face of trauma and stress and adversity, you can see that it's much harder for the brain to connect the dots that would help us to plan and use logic and feelings to problem solve, or to be able to see the long-term view, the long-term impact of their choices when the wiring has kind of been short-circuited. So a lack of support combined with stress and trauma has altered the brain in ways that create this negative feedback loop. And it's hard. We all know it's really kind of difficult to support a person who's impulsive and violent. But the brain simply cannot heal from stress and trauma without support. And so we have a really key role to play. The good news here is that we know the brain is malleable, meaning that it can rewire and grow new connections in the presence of positive supports. And here's where we, in this virtual room, come into play. The brain changes that are happening during adolescence really do make it an opportune time for experiences and interventions that support positive neural connections in the brain. And really, there's even some research to show that there's a possibility that the brain may be able to rewire from some of that early adversity that kids may have experienced. And so as you implement SRAE programming with middle schoolers and high schoolers, you're meeting people at an extremely rich opportunity in their lives. And how cool is that? that you could have such a significant impact on their long-term flourishing and thriving if we can really do our job well, right? And so there's really a ton of information out there on the neuroplasticity of the brain and self-regulation during adolescence, but I would strongly suggest that you seek out the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's 2019 report titled The Promise of Adolescence. It's really fascinating. So if you want to do some extended learning after this session, that's one place I would direct you to go. Okay, so listen, we're talking about why it's important for us to help youth develop self-regulation skills, but we adults need it too. And facilitators need support and self-care, and we're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. Okay, so now I want to take just a minute here. I would like you to share your responses to this question in the chat. How does self-regulation relate to student learning outcomes in SRAE? And I'll give you a few minutes to kind of process that question and think about your response and then share it in the chat. Good, okay. You can better facilitate the lesson, deeper understanding, they can focus and learn. They're able to take what they learn and apply it in real life. Sorry, I'm not even going to be able to read all of these, but they're fantastic and great, and I really appreciate those of you that are sharing your ideas. Students can be better able to correlate their decisions between sex and future goals. Fantastic, yeah. So you guys are really getting it there. So really, self-regulation is foundational to our programs. If we can support and model self-regulation and how we facilitate, then our participants are going to be more engaged during the lessons, and we'll be able to form stronger connections with them, and this could really translate to better program outcomes, and ultimately that means changes, positive changes in the adolescents' lives. So let's look at some practical ways that we can do that. Okay, so we're going to talk about what this looks like in terms of co-regulation, and what is it and how can I do it? Co-regulation is a supportive approach that's implemented by adults to prioritize warm relationships, nurturing environments, while coaching and modeling self-regulation skills. And the term co-regulation really started out as a word for adult support of infants, but we're really expanding it now to describe the support that can occur in caring relationships kind of across the lifespan. And so you'll see the circles here are really pulled from a model that's used by OPRE, the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation. And they have some really great resources and information that, again, I would highly suggest you look at, and I'll have kind of more information, links to that at the end of this session so you can find it. But co-regulation is really just the supportive process between a caring adult and another person, a child, a teen, a young adult, two partners in a marriage. You can refer to any of that. And that process really fosters the ability to manage our thoughts, feelings, and actions, as we talked about, to help achieve goals. And so this is sort of a visual of how self-regulation is supported by co-regulation. Co-regulation is about prioritizing those things that we mentioned there on the slide, the relationships, the environment, and skills coaching. And you can see those in these concentric circles on the screen. Those 3 domains are kind of demonstrated there. And then that green kind of triangle space in the middle of those, the overlap, is where it is showing how those 3 things work together to support youth self-regulation. And so things like when I put a poster on the wall, or maybe write on the whiteboard to remind students to keep their cell phone silenced and in their bag. And then I don't have mine out either. I put mine away also, and then kind of warmly reminding them that we're doing that so that we can all stay better focused on what we've come to do. That's an example of co-regulating. And so, you know, babies really rely on adults for almost 100% of their regulation, right? They need adults to anticipate and prepare for all of their needs and help soothe them. And so then adolescents have a lot of development happening in their brains, as we talked about. And then also adults who have experienced trauma, chronic stress, violence in the absence of support might need more co-regulation than those who have not experienced those things. And because trauma and chronic stress can really impede an adolescent's ability to self-regulate, and because SRA is typically implemented in a classroom setting where we don't really have the luxury of one-on-one counseling, we really need to partner with the schools or other organizations that can provide that connective follow-up care for continued co-regulation. And so the truth of the matter is we really all need co-regulation at some point. We need it in our relationships. We need it to learn. We need it to be able to feel a sense of belonging and acceptance. And so that's why we suggest this framework as the foundation for masterful program delivery. It's really sort of like the basics of being able to connect with youth, right? So focusing on those 3 circles can really guide you towards what matters when planning how to facilitate. And so, like I said, the rest of the time, we're going to really focus on brainstorming ways to apply this framework to your practice. So we're going to look at each of these 3 circles kind of separately, and then we'll bring them back together at the end. So let's look first at the importance of warm, responsive relationships. Really, what that looks like is responding with warmth and affection and avoiding harsh or judgmental remarks, being able to really listen genuinely with our full attention, and then validating their feelings and their perspectives, and offering support during those periods of strong emotion. And you know what's really interesting, I had just recently attended a webinar put on by the Search Institute talking about their research on developmental relationships. And one of the things that they did, they shared some of their data, and the response from the youth when they asked the youth about whether or not the adults, in this case it was teachers, really valued them and their input, the students all rated that really low, basically saying that they did not feel like the adults in their lives valued their perspective or respected them. And I mean, we as people can understand how yucky that feels, right? Like, you want to be valued, you want to just be accepted and be able to share your thoughts and feelings. And so it's really important that we're intentional about that, because in that case, and I might flub this, you might want to look at the research yourself on it, but in that instance, they had asked the same question of the adults, and then again, in this case, it was the teachers. And the teachers had all rated that they thought they absolutely valued the students' perspective and asked them for feedback and for their take on things. And so there was this imbalance. The adults thought they were doing it, the students really weren't feeling it at all. So again, just really important to kind of be intentional about that. And again, this is where maybe like youth focus groups where you can ask some of those students to provide their feedback and their ideas of whether you're doing that well or not could be really valuable. Okay, then, sharing your perspective, allowing them to make their own decisions and experience the natural consequences of that. I can tell you that as a parent, there are many times that I've really wanted to make a decision for my kids, and but really guiding them in critical thinking and allowing them to really make the decision. And then the hard part, experience the natural consequences from that, either good or bad. But sometimes that's really hard for us as adults to kind of let go of it and do, but it's really necessary to help them grow and develop self-regulation skills. And then lastly, just show and encourage compassion for self and others. How much do we all need more of that? You can't have enough compassion and encouragement, right? And so the youth that we serve need it too. So if you can turn in your handout again, there's a little journal activity here. There we go. Sorry, you guys, there's lots of pages in that handout, but it's all really good information, so hopefully you'll appreciate it. But if you turn in your handout to this journal activity, it looks like this with the green at the top, and there's some spaces to write in your responses. I want you to just think about a time where you really felt cared for, a time when you were welcomed as part of a group or a community, and then the people you were with were kind and warm, and you knew that they were there for you if you needed them. So take just a minute to try and think of a time that kind of describes. And then once you have that in your mind, think about what specific things did they do or say, and how did they behave so that you knew you were cared for and that they had your back. And this would be things that like others could see or hear if they were watching. So things like maybe they smiled at you every time they saw you, or whatever it might be. Write a word or two to describe those behaviors on your handout in that first section of your journal space, okay? And then once you've jotted them down for your own benefit, for your own note-taking, then if you can share those words, the word or two that describes what they did for you, that told you that they cared, if you'd share that in your chat so that we can all sort of learn from each other, I would really appreciate that. Good. Yep. Showing concern, eye contact, warm smile, a face-to-face welcome, affirmations, yes, positive inclusion, asking questions, making eye contact, smiling. Yeah, all of those things that seem pretty easy. They don't take a whole lot from us, but it really does have a significant impact on those that we come in contact with. How many of you have really missed seeing people smile now that we have to wear these masks when we're out in public, right? it really changes the feeling of social engagement, even in those kind of acquaintance situations when you can't see someone smiling. Oh, I like these. Genuine and honest conversation, good, yeah, body language. That it could vary culture to culture. It might be tricky if you have different cultural background for some of your students. Absolutely. Another reason why it's so important to really, one, just be genuine. You have to be yourself, but you also have to have cultural competence, right? You have to kind of know the environment that you're coming into. And what we say at Ascend a lot of times is that that really shows the value of seeing examples in skin, examples that you can really relate to. So we could spend a whole day on that. No pressure expectations. I love this. Thank you. I can tell you're thinking. I like this one. I had a teacher that always dressed really super nice. When asked about it, she said she was in the presence of really important people and she wanted to make sure we knew that she thought we were important. Oh, that's great. A smile is kind in all cultures, I hope. Absolutely. Good. All right. I love that. So I'm hoping that we can, the rest of this time, we're really going to be using that chat feature a lot to share ideas, and then we're going to be referring back to it so that you can take the ideas that are shared in the chat and jot them down so that you can save them. And I know that having a handout, especially maybe in a virtual environment, can be a little bit of a hassle. If you didn't get a chance to download it and you were kind of scrambling to do that at the beginning or whatever, but the goal of these is really to walk away with an actionable plan. That we come to these sessions, there's so much information, it's a lot to take in, and you, even if hopefully that you'll think that this is really great and useful information and want to be able to incorporate it, but then when you go back to your day-to-day work, it's easy for those to kind of slip your mind, or that you just don't do anything with it. So hopefully these handouts will kind of force us to think about actionable steps we can take, and then we have a record of it so that we can refer back to it later on. So, all right, so let's move on here and think about if you are the participant. So you were kind of thinking of, you guys were really great and kind of jumped the gun, and you're thinking of things that, well, will carry over and relate for the students too, but think for a moment about what a facilitator, anything else a facilitator could do, that could say or do, that could communicate that the students are known and cared for. And you can kind of even think back to Tracy's session yesterday again about building relationships with schools and parents and co-facilitators and just ways to build trust. So think about that for a minute. And then again, try thinking of one action. Sorry, I skipped it there. If you want to write that down, you can write that in the second journal spot here, down at the bottom, of things that a facilitator might do. So the first time we were thinking about things that make us feel cared for when we're coming into a group. And then now think about, as the kind of a flipped role, that as the participant, what kind of things could a facilitator do in the classroom? And you can journal that there. We'll give just a minute. If you want to scroll through some of these really, really brilliant ideas that people are sharing in the chat, that would be an excellent opportunity to kind of spark your imagination.
Melissa, did you see in the chat where they were saying use of name just makes people feel valuable? You know, I think that's a great one.
Yes, it is. How great is that? It's like this was planned or something, that this kind of session would come after Scott's session and some of the others and Tracy's session. Do you see it's all kind of coming together? It all relates. So hopefully you can, yeah, that name idea from Scott's session about how important realizing names are is really beneficial. And you know what, actually in his session yesterday, I noticed someone shared in the chat that they use name tents for their students and put it on the desks. But in addition to having the name, they ask the students to write kind of like the phonetic spelling to remind them of how to actually pronounce the name correctly. And it's another benefit of those kind of name game icebreakers that Scott mentioned, because if you're utilizing something like that, you're having a chance to hear from the student how they pronounce their name. So, you know, having that opportunity to hear it and the visual to see it too, it can help you, because we all know it's a struggle to try and learn everyone's name right away at that very beginning, but it's so important for us for the students and for people in general to really feel seen if you use their name. So those are great ideas for ways to do that. Okay, so next, what I want you to do, I mean, we just kind of took one step towards integrating that first circle of the co-regulation framework into your classroom. And you guys have been doing great brainstorming here in the chat. So what I want you to do is think of, or take a look at the ideas that were shared in the chat, or the ideas that you thought of as you were sort of pondering and brainstorming on your own, and write one action that you want to take, that you're not already doing, that you want to try and use, and write it on this flip side of your page here by this orange circle. So one action that you can take to prioritize a warm, responsive relationship with the students. So I think I saw, you know, some examples of standing at the door when people are entering the classroom, and that you're greeting them face to face rather than standing at the front of the room trying to get ready to teach, that kind of a thing. Or it might be positive praise.
Melissa, also in the chat room or the chat box, Sherry Richardson mentioned the environment. And I think we might underestimate, and you said this just a moment ago, that everything speaks. You know, just putting a black tablecloth over your desk that you're putting your projector equipment on, if you're the guest speaker, just speaks to that you care about the representation of not just the curriculum, but that the students are receiving something of value to them. So I love that idea.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's so great. And actually, I should pay whoever that was, because that's a perfect segue into what we're talking about next. So once we've kind of thought about that warm responsibility, yay, good job. Yeah, really, I mean, that's one of the other circles here in this framework is the environment, because yes, all those things really do matter. And so the environment speaks to not just the physical environment, although those strategies, and Tracy, I love that, putting a tablecloth over, or even what Tammy was mentioning about the facilitator dressing in professional attire to try to communicate the value of the students. All of those kind of things help to create those safe, supportive environments. And so those are all things that we need to consider. And I'm going to skip past just a minute of that because of our time here. But
hey, Melissa, also, Sanita, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but said, you know, how do we do that virtually? And I think you've modeled that, just caring about the environment that's set up around you. I know we always don't have fancy backgrounds or anything, but just showing up dressed appropriately, right? And not showing up laying in bed in your jammies, which I know you would do, but just, you know, being cognizant of the environment and I like to wear the bright colors just because I know everybody's looking at this black and white screen or a screen all day. And I kind of like to wear something bold, or, you know, be a little more animated than I normally would be, because I know it's going to translate a little bit better
Yeah.
via video or Zoom. So
yes, that's why you wear those cute flashy earrings, huh? Does everyone see her
Right.
earrings? I love them. They're so cute. Yeah, no, that's really good. And actually, I'm really glad you brought that up because I'm going to direct the next sharing that we provide on these environments to really try and focus on, in light of this landscape that we're in, how do we incorporate these strategies virtually? So you will notice I've tried to demonstrate some of that. I tend to talk with my hands anyway, but I think especially when, normally I would try and sort of limit that. But in this virtual kind of environment, I think those kind of things are useful. It makes us feel more real, that we're not just this talking head floating, and helps us to feel more like a real person. So yes, absolutely be sharing ideas that you guys have learned and come across for ways to really do these things virtually. I know that that's the learning curve that we're all on here, but again, okay, so safe, supportive environments is more than just the physical space. It includes the way we make the kids feel. And so even things like offering a space, a refuel zone, a space and a time where they can kind of step away if they need to, that can be really beneficial. In the 1960s, Herbert Benson of Harvard University had identified sort of this counterbalance to that involuntary fight or flight response to stress. He identified this counterbalance and he called it the relaxation response. And so the relaxation response is intentional and it really requires practice. And that's where kind of the mindfulness strategies and deep breathing and those sort of things come into play. It's really being intentional about helping our bodies to physically relax, because that will in turn help our minds to sort of relax. And that's a way to help students build self-regulation. And so we can incorporate strategies like that even into a virtual space, right? And then the last strategy that I want you to consider in terms of environment is providing clear and consistent expectations so that students know the plan up front and they know what to expect, and that there's consistency every time you're with them. That will really help kind of reduce the need for regulation skills. It will help, kids just sort of thrive best on routine, and adolescents do too. So you see some of the suggestions there for safe, supportive environments. So now, I know we're kind of racing through the end here, but I really do want you to have opportunity to share with each other. So think of one action a facilitator could take to enhance the environment of their sessions. And again, if you have a suggestion for something that can be done virtually, bonus, that would be great, because we all really want to focus on that. But even if you can't come up with something virtually, if you can share an action that a facilitator could take to kind of create that safe, supportive environment, and share it in the chat. Slow down and be in the moment. Yes, sometimes it is really even just, this is not what I'm demonstrating now as I'm trying to race through the rest of this material, but ideally, using a calm voice and just being soothing. I know a lot of times we're trying to be energetic and really keep the energy going, and that certainly has a place and is really needed when you're working with youth also. But sometimes even just the way we talk or the way we move, all those things really do speak. So think of one thing and share it in the chat here, and then we're going to look through the chat and copy down whatever action we want to take, whatever really great idea we saw, and write it next to the environments circle here. And I'm going to click back so that you can look at this slide to kind of get ideas. So what kind of ways could you incentivize good choices? Or how could you provide prompts for skill use for self-regulation? What are those kind of environmental strategies or environmental factors that you could influence? become familiar with things that they enjoy doing, usually ask about hobbies. Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to kind of get to know them. So what about opening and close the class with a shared breath or a moment of reflection? I like that. That's a nice and peaceful way to go into it. I'm sure many of you are already doing this as you're implementing virtually, but things like, you know, just as you would create group values or expectations at the beginning of a session in person, you can do those kind of things virtually too, right? And in light of time, I'm going to let you think about that one. If you don't already have an action written down, that can be your homework. To think about one of the things that you could, one action you could take virtually to influence the environment, to create a safe and supportive space. Okay, really quickly, this third circle, I want to talk about the third circle of this framework, and that is skills coaching. And coaching is really different than just teaching. And so when I was thinking about how is teaching different than coaching and sort of brainstorming my own ideas there, I was thinking about cooking. I enjoy food a lot. I am not a very good cook, but I do have the benefit of several really great cooks in my family. My husband and son love cooking, and they enjoy it, and I love eating their food. So I naturally went to food. But I was thinking, like, the difference between reading a recipe where you have the ingredients and you're given kind of step-by-step instructions versus, and that's sort of like the, you know, the teaching idea, versus having your grandma standing right next to you and coaching you along. She might demonstrate how to roll out the dough, or she might suggest trusted ingredient brands. And she might encourage you to try a new skill, or gently redirect you if you are needing some correction. And, you know, things like you can ask questions to get clarification and all of that. Like, you can feel the difference, right? So there's a difference between teaching and coaching. With grandma coaching you, she can model actions and allow you to practice the skills. There's ongoing reinforcement, feedback and reflection, and then encouragement for more practice. So now let's translate that idea to our work in SRA. How do we help build self-regulation through skills coaching? Well, we can really model and talk about negative emotions and stress and help them to identify their feelings, and then prompt them to use coping strategies like mindfulness and those sort of things. And then really showing and narrating what you do to manage your own emotions and stress is really beneficial, because we all know that adolescents learn more from what they see you do, from that observational learning, than from what you tell them to do. So in an SRA presentation, you could coach them to consider a longer term perspective where they're setting goals for their future. Maybe you could help them anticipate challenges and problem solve in advance. You know, what are they going to do if they get into a situation that's uncomfortable? For example, you could teach students how to say no to negative peer pressures and situations, and then have them role play those refusal and resistance skills so that they get some practice at it, so that they're prepared with the words to say if they're in those situations, right? Okay, so finally, I really do want to have our sheets filled out here. We're going to have like 0 time for questions, but look, write down your one action that you want to take home about skills coaching, things that you could do. And again, if you can think of ideas virtually, that would be really great. Okay.
Melissa, we have 2 minutes.
I know. I just want to end on this, you guys. This really is the very end. Sometimes there's this sense that self-care is selfish, but really in truth, you need to be able to manage your own thoughts and feelings and behaviors so that you can facilitate as well as possible. So just like the oxygen on an airplane, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first. So you have to take care of yourself before you can be a co-regulator for another person. So really, successful co-regulation can only happen when you have actualized self-regulation. So I'm hoping that you can look at some of these ideas that you have on your worksheet and then really go for it. I know you have it in you. You're in this training because you're really engaged in this work, because you care and value youth and the adolescents you work with. And so I am confident that that will motivate you to implement some new action items into your work so that you can really master the art of facilitation. And so I thank you for your time. If you have questions, you can email me and I'll share that in just a minute. Here is some more information if you want to like take out your phone and take a picture of that to be able to look for more research on self-regulation in adolescents. Again, the OPRE website is chock full of all kinds of great information on this topic. And here's my contact information. If you have questions or anything for follow-up, feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you.
And don't forget to fill out the survey at the end of the day. And don't forget all recordings and presentations and handouts that will be available on the Exchange about a week after the training.
And thank you for sharing all of your ideas. And it's great to still feel like we can do that knowledge share together. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you, Melissa and Tracy, and all of our participants that joined today. We will see you in a few short minutes after our break for the Curriculum Fidelity and Strategies for Ensuring Successful Transfer of Skills. Thank you for joining.